His team leader wrote one sentence in the debrief report. One sentence. I'll read it to you. Intelligence Specialist Strand exploited positional advantage and simunition allocation to neutralize 9 of 11 operators during the force-on-force exercise conducted on November 14th, 2017. That's it. That's what he wrote. No adjective, no recommendation, no follow-up. Just a sentence that sounds like it came out of an equipment inventory log instead of a tactical after-action review. 9 of 11. And his best word was exploited. I read that sentence 4 times the first night I found it. Then I closed the file and poured myself a drink, because I knew what that sentence was hiding, and I knew it would take me a while to dig it out. Her name was Kira Strand, Petty Officer 2nd Class, United States Navy. Intelligence Specialist, IS rate, for those who know, out of Annapolis, Maryland. Not the academy, the town, the one that sits across the Severn River from a yard and watches midshipmen jog past in formation every morning while regular people drink coffee on their porches and go to work. She grew up 6 blocks from Gate 1 and never once walked through it. Her father did, though. Commander David Strand. Surface warfare officer, 24 years in the Navy, 3 deployments to the Persian Gulf, 2 to the Western Pacific. He retired in 2009 with a Legion of Merit and a bad knee and a house that smelled like Old Spice and reheated casserole. Her grandfather, Captain William Strand, made it further. 31 years, commanded a destroyer escort in the late 60s and a frigate in the late 70s. He had a shadow box in the hallway with his insignia and his ribbons and a photograph of him shaking hands with someone important that Kira never bothered to identify. 2 generations of officers, 2 generations of academy rings and wardroom manners and careers measured in fitness reports and selection boards. And then came Kira, who scored 1440 on her SATs and got into 3 decent schools and chose none of them, who walked into a Navy recruiting office on West Street this summer after high school and said she wanted to enlist. Not commission, enlist. Her father didn't speak to her for 9 days. I know this because her mother told his brother, and his brother told a retired chief who played golf with a man I know. That's how I got most of this story, through walls. Through people who heard it from someone who was there, or almost there, or knew someone who was. Kira Strand didn't leave a trail. She left an absence, and I had to map the absence to find the shape of her. The recruiter's name was Petty Officer 1st Class Dominguez. He worked the Annapolis office on West Street, between a subway and a place that sold monogrammed boat bags to tourists. He told me, and I tracked him down, which took 4 months, that she came in wearing jeans and a plain gray t-shirt and no jewelry. She sat down across from his desk and said she wanted to be an intelligence specialist. Not, I'm interested in the Navy, or what jobs do you have? She said, I want IS. I want a TS/SCI clearance. I want to deploy. Dominguez said he almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because in 11 years of recruiting, nobody had ever walked in with a shopping list like that. Most kids came in scared or broke or both. She came in like she was placing an order. He asked her why not OCS. Officer Candidate School. With her scores, with her family, she could have gone commissioned. She could have had ensign on her collar in 16 weeks. She said, and Dominguez remembers this clearly because he wrote it on a Post-it note and stuck it to his monitor for 3 years. She said, officers get briefed. I want to be the one doing the briefing. Boot camp was Great Lakes. Winter class, January 2014. I don't have details from boot camp because boot camp doesn't produce interesting stories for people like Kira Strand. She graduated. She was neither first nor last. She qualified on the M9 Beretta. She passed her PRT. She didn't make friends the way most recruits do, through shared misery and bunk proximity. She made what I would call functional alliances. People who could help her with things she needed help with. People she could help in return. Transactional. Clean. No drama. A school was in Virginia Beach. Dam Neck. The intelligence training pipeline. 6 months of learning how to process signals intelligence, how to manage classified databases, how to write reports that would be read by people 3 pay grades above you who would never learn your name. She finished second in her class. The person who finished first was a former college professor with a linguistics degree who later washed out of his first unit for failing a polygraph. Strand passed hers without a spike. Her first duty station was supposed to be Fort Meade, Maryland. NSA support, desk work, screens and headphones and coffee and clearance badges and the slow, air-conditioned grind of intelligence collection. She requested a change. She wanted an operational billet, something attached to special operations, something with a deployment cycle. Her detailer, the person who manages assignments, told her that junior IS sailors don't get to choose. She wrote a request sheet. It was denied. She wrote another one. Denied. She wrote a third one and attached a letter explaining her qualifications, her language aptitude scores, her marksmanship record, and her willingness to accept any billet in any theater that would put her closer to the operational side of the house. The third one got noticed. Not approved. Noticed. A senior chief in the Spec War support pipeline read it and called her detailer and said, "Who is this?" And the detailer said, "A problem." And the senior chief said, "Good. Send her to me." That's how Kira Strand ended up at Camp Lemonnier. Djibouti, Horn of Africa, the only permanent U.S. military installation on the African continent. A place that used to be a French Foreign Legion outpost and still felt like one. Cracked concrete, corrugated metal, sand that got into everything. Sand in your boots, sand in your food, sand in the classified hard drives that weren't supposed to have sand in them, but did anyway, because nothing in Djibouti stayed clean. I need to tell you about Camp Lemonnier, because the base is a character in this story. It sits on the southern edge of Djibouti and Bully International Airport. You can hear civilian flights taking off while SEALs are doing CQB drills 200 meters away. The base houses about 4,000 personnel at any given time, a mix of Navy, Marine, Army, Air Force, and a rotating cast of special operations units that come and go like weather patterns. SEAL teams, Marine Raiders, Army Special Forces, Delta, though nobody calls them that to their face. They cycle through for deployments into Somalia, Yemen, the Sahel. They train, they wait, they launch, they come back, or they don't. The regular support staff, the logistics people, the admin people, the intelligence people live in a different world on the same base. They eat in the same chow hall. They use the same gym. But there's a line. It's not painted on the ground. It's not written in any regulation. But everyone knows where it is. The operators are on one side. Everyone else is on the other. And the operators make sure you know which side you're on. Kira Strand arrived in Djibouti in March 2017. She was 23 years old, Petty Officer 3rd Class. She had been promoted ahead of her peers because her evaluation scores were high and her chief at the pre-deployment workup liked her. She was assigned to a SIGINT support element that provided intelligence to a SEAL team. I won't use the team number, but it was one of the East Coast teams, and they were on their second rotation to the Horn of Africa that fiscal year. Her job was to sit in a SCGF, a sensitive compartmented information facility, which is a fancy name for a windowless metal box with a cipher lock on the door, and process intercepted communications. Phone calls, radio chatter, text messages pulled from cell towers. She would listen. She would translate. She had functional Arabic and passable Somali, both learned at DLI in Monterey. She would write reports. She would brief the team's intelligence officer. The intelligence officer would brief the team leader. The team leader would decide what to do with it. She was 3 steps removed from the trigger. And that's where the Navy wanted her to stay. The SCIF was hot. Not metaphorically. The air conditioning unit on the roof was 20 years old and made a sound like a dying animal. It kept the temperature around 82 degrees, which is fine if you're sitting still, which she was for 12 hours a day, 6 days a week. She wore her NW Type 3s, the blue and gray camouflage that nobody in the history of the Navy has ever called attractive, and she kept a bottle of water on her desk and a pack of peanut M and MS in her cargo pocket, and she did her job. She did it well. I know this because her evaluation from that period, her eval, the semi-annual fitness report for enlisted sailors, used the phrase unparalleled analytical rigor. Navy evals are written in a language that sounds like a real estate listing crossed with a legal brief. So when a chief petty officer writes unparalleled about a third-class petty officer, it means something happened that he couldn't ignore. What happened was this. In her second month at Lemonnier, Strand identified a pattern in intercepted cell traffic from a village in southern Somalia that indicated a weapons cache was being moved. Not just any cache, a significant one, the kind that suggests an operation is being planned. She wrote the report. She flagged it. She walked it to the intelligence officer herself, which is unusual. Normally you file it and let trickle up. She walked it in and said, "This needs to go to the team leader today." It went to the team leader that day. The team launched 3 days later. They found the cache exactly where her analysis said it would be. 14 RPG launchers, 230 rounds of ammunition, 6 IED components, enough to supply a company-sized element for a month. Nobody thanked her. That's not unusual. In the spec war world, the analyst doesn't get thanked. The analyst is a tool. The wrench doesn't get thanked for turning the bolt. But she noticed. She noticed because the team leader walked past the SCIF the next morning and didn't look up. She noticed because the debrief report listed the cache recovery as the result of multi-source intelligence fusion, without mentioning her report, her name, or her rate. She noticed because that's what intelligence specialists do. They notice things. The first time she went to the range was a Tuesday. I know it was a Tuesday because range days at Lemonnier rotated on a fixed schedule, and the open qualification range for support staff was every other Tuesday and Thursday. She signed out an M18, the 6-hour P320 variant that had just been fielded as the new sidearm, and walked to lane 7 and put 50 rounds through the target at 15 meters. 47 of 50 in the black. The range safety officer was a Marine Staff sergeant named Pelletier. He told me, and I found him through a mutual friend at Quantico, that he looked at her target through the spotting scope and then looked at her and then looked at the target again. He said she was standing there with her ear protection around her neck and her eyes on the target board and no expression on her face at all. He walked down her lane and said, "Where did you learn to shoot like that?" And she said, "Great Lakes." And he said, "Bullshit." And she almost smiled. Almost. He said the corner of her mouth moved about 2 millimeters and then stopped like she caught it. That was the beginning of the problem, because Lane 6 was occupied that day. Lane 6 was occupied by 2 members of the SEAL team she supported, and they saw her target, and they saw Pelletier walk down to her lane, and they heard him say bullshit. And one of them, Strand never learned his name, and I never confirmed it, said, loud enough for her to hear, "Nice group for a desk jockey." She didn't respond. She collected her brass. She cleaned the M18. She turned it back into the armory. She walked back to the SCF. And she didn't go back to the range for 2 weeks. But the story went around the base. Stories always go around bases. Bases are small towns with better fences. By the end of the week, the entire team knew that the Sigint girl had outshot 2 of their own on the pistol range. And that's when the nickname started. Logistics. Not logistics, bitch. That came later. At first, it was just logistics. said with a particular inflection, a particular smile, the kind of smile that says, I know what you are and I know what I am, and they're not the same thing. They'd see her in the chow hall, and someone would say, hey, logistics. They'd pass her on the gravel path between the barracks and the SCIF, and someone would nod and say, logistics. She answered to it. She didn't flinch. She didn't complain. She just kept walking. I want to pause here because I know what you're thinking. You're thinking this is a story about a woman who was bullied by SEALs and then proved them wrong, and then they all clapped. That's not this story. This story is slower than that, and colder, and the ending isn't what you want it to be. Stay with me. The escalation happened in June, 3 months after she arrived. The team had come back from a 2-week deployment into Somalia. I can't say what they did, and they were in that post-deployment space where the adrenaline has burned off and the boredom hasn't settled in yet, and everyone is restless and mean. It's a dangerous space. I've seen it turn good men ugly. It turned these men something less than ugly, but more than careless. She was in the gym. Lemonnier had a decent gym. Free weights, squat racks, a few treadmills that worked most of the time. She was doing deadlifts. Not heavy. Working weight. Maybe 225. She was wearing standard PT gear, shorts, and a navy t-shirt. And she had her earbuds in, and she was minding her own business. A group of 5 operators came in. They were loud. They were always loud after deployments. They took the squat rack next to hers. One of them, again, I don't have the name, and I wouldn't use it if I did, looked at her bar and said, 225? That's cute. My girlfriend warms up with that. She didn't take her earbuds out. She might not have heard him. She might have heard him and chosen not to respond. Either way, the result was the same. He said it again, louder. Hey, logistics. I said that's cute. She racked her bar. She took one earbud out. She looked at him, and she said, and this is the only direct quote from her that I have in this entire story because it was repeated by 3 different people who were in that gym. She said, I heard you the first time. Then she put her earbud back in and went back to her set. He didn't say anything else, but the word evolved after that. Logistics became logistics bitch, not to her face, behind her back, in the team room, which was a space she was technically allowed to enter, but practically never did. In the chow hall, at the far table by the window where the operators sat together. She knew. Of course she knew. She processed intelligence for a living. She noticed patterns in cell phone traffic from villages she'd never visited. You think she didn't notice patterns in the behavior of men she saw every day? She noticed. She just didn't care. Or she cared and decided that caring was a luxury she couldn't afford. I never got to ask her which one it was. She wouldn't talk to me. I want to tell you about the days between the gym and the exercise. The months, really. Because the story isn't just about the force on force. The story is about the 5 months of invisible work she did while 11 men decided she was beneath them. She wrote 43 intelligence reports between March and November 2017. I have the count from her eval. 43. 7 of them were flagged as critical by the intelligence officer, which means they directly informed operational planning. 2 of them, including the one about the weapons cache, resulted in missions. She was working 14-hour days. She learned enough Somali dialect variation to distinguish between speakers from different clans, which is a skill that takes most DLI graduates years to develop. She did it in months. Alone, in a hot metal box, with headphones and Peanut M and MS. Nobody knew this. Nobody outside the SCF knew the volume of her output. The intelligence officer knew. Her chief knew. But the team? The operators? They saw a woman in blue and gray camo who went to the chow hall alone, and the gym alone, and the range alone, and who never talked to anyone she didn't have to talk to. They saw logistics. They saw desk. They saw irrelevant. In September, she made petty officer second class. She sewed on the crow in her room. Alone. No ceremony. No cake in the chief's mess. Just a new patch on her uniform and an extra $200 a month. In October, something changed. I don't know exactly what triggered it. The team was between deployments. Downtime. The team's training officer, the one responsible for maintaining combat readiness during the garrison phase, scheduled a force-on-force exercise. This is standard. Teams do them regularly. They set up scenarios, hostage rescue, compound assault, ambush response, and run them with simunition rounds. Simunition is training ammunition that fires marking cartridges. Paint rounds. They sting when they hit. They leave a mark. They let you know, in a very physical way, that you made a mistake. The exercise was scheduled for November 14th. Nighttime. Urban terrain. They'd use the shoot house and the surrounding compound area. The scenario was straightforward. A target individual was in a building, and the team had to locate and extract. The target individual would be defended by an opposing force, OPFOR, of 2 to 4 people from the base's support staff who had volunteered to play the bad guys. I don't know who volunteered Kira Strand. She says she volunteered herself. 2 other people told me she was volunteered by the intelligence officer as a joke that wasn't entirely a joke. Either way, her name went on the OPFOR list. The only woman. The only intelligence specialist. The only person on the list who wasn't trained in ground combat. When the team saw the OPFOR roster, someone laughed. I was told this by Pelletier, the Marine Range Safety Officer, who was helping set up the scenario. He said he was in the planning room when the roster was posted, and he heard one of the operators say, "Logistics is playing," and then laughter. General, easy, dismissive laughter. The kind you give to something that isn't a threat. Strand was given a standard OPFOR loadout, an M4 carbine modified for simunition, 2 magazines, a sidearm with 1 magazine, a radio, and a building to defend. The target individual was a mannequin with a strobe light taped to its chest, placed in a second-floor room. Her job was to prevent the team from reaching it. Simple, straightforward, impossible. Because the team assaulting the building was 11 SEALs with night vision, breaching charges, flashbangs, and 10,000 hours of combined close-quarters combat experience. She had 2 other OPFOR volunteers, both Navy Master-at-Arms, both competent but not operators. She had a building she'd never been inside. She had 4 hours to prepare. And this is where the story turns. She asked for the building keys at 1400. The exercise was scheduled for 2200. 8 hours. The training officer gave her a key ring and a map of the compound and a look that said, "Good luck, you'll need it." She didn't need luck. She needed time, and she used all 8 hours of it. I know what she did during those 8 hours because Pelletier watched part of it, and one of the Master-at-Arms, second class named Birch, told me the rest. Birch is the only person in this story who spoke to me willingly, without hesitation, without conditions. He said he'd been waiting 7 years for someone to ask about that night. 7 years. He lives in Pensacola now. Works at a boat repair yard. He has a scar on his left forearm from a simunition round that hit him at close range during the exercise, and he showed it to me over a video call like it was a Purple Heart. Here's what Strand did. She walked the building alone first. Top to bottom. Every room. Every hallway. Every stairwell. Every window. She counted steps. She counted doors. She opened closets and looked inside them and closed them again. She went up to the roof and stood there and looked at the compound from above and didn't move for 15 minutes. Just stood, looking. The building was a 3-story concrete structure that had been used for CQB training, shoot house exercises, room clearances, hostage rescue scenarios. The walls were pocked with simunition paint from 100 previous exercises. The floors were concrete. The stairwells were narrow. The roof was flat with a low parapet wall, maybe 3 feet high. Then she came down and got Birch and the other master-at-arms, a woman named Torres, first class, who I was never able to reach, and she briefed them. Birch said the brief lasted 40 minutes. 40 minutes for a training exercise that most OPFOR teams prepare for in 10. She had drawn a diagram of the building on a piece of cardboard she'd torn from an MRE case. She had marked every entry point, every window, every blind spot. She had assigned positions. She had assigned fallback positions. She had assigned contingency positions in case the fallback positions were compromised. Birch said he looked at Torres, and Torres looked at him, and neither of them said anything because they both realized at the same time that this woman had just done in 6 hours what they'd seen SEAL team leaders do before an actual operation. Her plan was simple. Simple in the way that the best plans are simple. Not because they lack complexity, but because the complexity has been compressed into something clean. The mannequin was on the second floor in a room at the end of a hallway. That's where the SEALs would go. That's where they'd expect the defense to be concentrated. So that's where the defense would not be. She put Torres on the second floor, one room away from the mannequin. Torres had an M4 with simunition and instructions to fire exactly 3 rounds at any operator who entered the hallway, then relocate to a predetermined position on the same floor. 3 rounds, not a magazine dump. 3, enough to mark them. Not enough to give away her position for longer than 2 seconds. She put Birch on the first floor, near the main entrance. His job was different. He wasn't supposed to shoot anyone. He was supposed to make noise, open a door, kick a trash can, drop a piece of metal, create the impression that the first floor was defended so that the entry team would slow down, clear every room, and burn time. Birch had his M4, but was told not to fire unless directly engaged. His weapon was sound, not bullets. Birch asked her, "Where will you be?" She said, "The roof." He said, "The roof? They'll come through the doors. The fight is inside the building." She said, "The fight is wherever I decide it is." Birch told me he didn't know what to say to that. So he said nothing. And at 30 minutes before the exercise, they took their positions. The night was clear. November in Djibouti doesn't feel like November anywhere else. It was still 85 degrees at 2100. The air smelled like diesel and dust and the distant ocean that you could never see from the base but could always smell when the wind shifted. There was no moon. Strand had checked. She had actually checked the lunar calendar before selecting the roof as her position. No moon meant the rooftop was dark. Dark enough that night vision would be required to see her. And night vision has limitations. Field of view, depth perception, the green-white flare of any light source. She carried the M4 and the sidearm. She had 2 magazines for each. She wore no body armor. OPFOR in training exercises rarely does. She wore her NWUs and a pair of boots she'd broken in over 8 months of Djibouti gravel. She had a radio tuned to the exercise frequency. She had a canteen of water. And she had a position behind the parapet wall on the northeast corner of the roof, where she could see the 2 primary approach routes to the building and the main entrance directly below. At 2200, the exercise began. I want to slow down here, because what happened next took 41 minutes in real time, and I'm going to take you through it the way it happened, not the way it gets told in bars afterward. The bar version is some intel chick wrecked an entire SEAL element in a training exercise. That's the version that went around Lemonnier for weeks. It's not wrong, but it's missing everything that matters. The SEAL element approached from the south. 11 operators. Full kit. Night vision, PVS 31s, the binocular type that gives you depth perception and a wider field of view than the older monocular models. Suppressed M4S with simunition. Breaching charges for doors. Flashbangs. Radio comms. They moved in 2 elements. an assault element of 8 and a support element of 3 that would hold the perimeter and cover the exits. Strand saw them at 22:07. She was lying prone behind the parapet with just her eyes and the top of her head above the wall. She watched them through the dark, no night vision of her own, just adapted eyes and the ambient light from the base perimeter lamps 200 meters away. She saw the shapes. She counted 11. She keyed her radio once. One click. That was the signal to Birch. They're here. The first thing the SEALs did was correct. They split. The support element, 3 operators, took positions around the building's exterior. One at the south entrance, one at the west fire exit, one at the north side, below the building's only exterior staircase. Their job was to prevent anyone from leaving and to cover the assault element's flanks. The assault element, 8 operators stacked on the south entrance. Standard CQB stack. Lead man, number 2, number 3, all the way back to 8. They paused. The lead man checked the door. Unlocked. Strand had left it unlocked on purpose. He opened it. They flowed in. Inside, on the first floor, Birch was ready. He waited until he heard boots on concrete, the particular sound of tactical boots moving fast on bare floor. And then he kicked a metal folding chair across the room he was hiding in. The sound was enormous in the concrete space. It echoed. It bounced off walls. It sounded like contact. The assault element froze. Then they did what they were trained to do. They began clearing the first floor, room by room, door by door, prying corners, checking closets, calling clear into their radios. This is what Strand wanted. Every minute they spent on the first floor was a minute they weren't on the second floor, where the mannequin was, and it was a minute she could use. Birch moved. He didn't run. He walked, quietly, through a doorway he'd propped open earlier into an adjacent room. Then through another door into a utility closet. He closed the door. He was invisible. The assault element cleared his original room and found nothing. They cleared the next room and found nothing. They cleared all 6 rooms on the first floor and found nothing. Birch was in the closet the whole time, 3 meters from them, breathing through his nose. 7 minutes gone. The team leader keyed his radio. First deck clear. Moving to second. This is when Torres engaged. The assault element came up the stairwell, narrow, concrete, 1 man wide. They emerged into the second floor hallway. Torres was in a doorway 30 feet away. She fired 3 rounds. The first hit the lead operator in the chest plate, marking paint, bright orange, splattered across his kit. The second hit the wall. The third hit the number 2 man in the shoulder. Then she was gone. Through the room, through a connecting door Strand had identified during her walkthrough. A door between 2 adjacent rooms that most people missed because it was behind a metal shelving unit that Torres had moved 2 inches to the left during the preparation and into a position on the opposite side of the floor. 2 operators marked in 3 seconds. The lead man swore. I was told this by Pelletier, who was monitoring the exercise from a control point with a radio and thermal optics. He said the team leader's voice on the radio went from professional to personal in 1 transmission. Contact second deck. 2 operators hit. Continuing. They cleared toward Torres's original position. Found nothing. Continued down the hallway. Torres fired again from her new position. 2 rounds this time, both from an angle they weren't expecting. She hit a 3rd operator in the leg. Then she relocated again, but they found her on the 3rd move. She ran out of rooms. A 4-man element cornered her in a dead-end office and lit her up with simunition from 3 meters. She was covered in orange paint from her shoulders to her knees. She raised her hands. Out. 3 operators marked in exchange for 1 op for eliminated. 14 minutes into the exercise, 3 of 8 assault operators marked as casualties. 5 still active. 3 perimeter operators untouched. The mannequin still on the second floor, untouched. The remaining 5 assault operators secured the mannequin. Mission technically accomplished. The team leader radioed the control point. Jackpot. Target secured. 3 friendly casualties. Pelletier radioed back. Exercise is not over. You have 2 OPFER still active. There was silence on the radio. Then say again. 2 OPFER still active. Birch and Strand. Exercise continues until all OPFER are neutralized or time expires. This was technically within the exercise rules. The team leader hadn't read them carefully. He'd assumed the exercise ended when they reached the mannequin. It didn't. The scenario stated that all OPFER had to be accounted for. Strand had read the rules. She had read them the way she read intercepted communications. Every word, every clause, every implication. The team leader reassigned. He sent the 5 remaining assault operators to sweep the building. He radioed the 3 perimeter operators to tighten their positions. He wanted this done fast. His men had just been embarrassed by a master at arms, and he could hear it in their breathing. The particular sound of professionals who are annoyed and want to prove something. They found Birch in 11 minutes. He'd moved from the utility closet to a ground floor bathroom, but he made a mistake. He bumped his rifle against the stall divider, and the metallic sound gave him away. 3 operators converged on the bathroom. Birch came out fighting. He got 1 round into an operator's thigh before they marked him. 4 assault casualties total. Birch out. 26 minutes into the exercise. 5 operators still active in the building. 3 on the perimeter. 1 OPFER remaining. Kiosk timed. On the roof, where she had been the entire time. They didn't know she was on the roof. That's the thing. Nobody checked the roof. In a standard CQB building clearance, you go bottom to top. Ground floor, second floor, third floor roof. But this building only had 2 occupied floors, the ground floor and the second floor where the mannequin was, and the assault element had cleared both. The third floor was an empty shell with no furniture and no tactical value. They'd cleared it in passing. Quick sweep. Nothing. The roof access was a hatch, a metal hatch at the top of the ladder in the third floor stairwell. It was closed. They assumed it was locked. It wasn't. Strand had unlocked it hours earlier and closed it again to look untouched. She listened to their radios. She could hear them because the exercise used an open frequency standard for training, so the control point could monitor all communications. She heard the team leader say, 1 OPFER remaining. Probably first deck. Sweep again. They swept the first floor again. Nothing. They swept the second floor. Nothing. They swept the third floor. Nothing. 29 minutes. The team leader pulled his assault element outside, regrouped with the perimeter team. 8 operators standing in a loose semicircle on the south side of the building, night vision on, weapons ready, looking at a building they'd cleared 3 times and finding nothing. And this is when Strand moved. She had been prone on the northeast corner of the roof for 29 minutes. Motionless. She hadn't shifted her weight. She hadn't drunk from her canteen. She hadn't keyed her radio. She had watched the perimeter operators below her for the entire exercise, track their patterns, their intervals, their blind spots. The north side perimeter operator had a habit of looking east every 40 seconds. She'd counted 40 seconds, sometimes 42, never less than 38. When the team leader pulled everyone to the south side, the north perimeter position was abandoned. The exterior staircase on the north side, a metal fire escape, rusted, loud, was unguarded. But she didn't use it. She didn't need to go down. They needed to come up. She keyed her radio. First time in 29 minutes. She said one word, roof. Pelletier heard it in the control point. He told me. He leaned forward in his chair. The team heard it on the open frequency. There was a pause, one of those pauses that has weight that you can feel through the radio. And then the team leader said, roof. She's on the roof. Go. 8 operators moved to the building. 5 through the south entrance, heading for the roof hatch. 3 stayed outside, covering the fire escape on the north side and the building exits. They were fast. They were angry. They had been looking for a woman for 15 minutes in a building she wasn't in, and now she was telling them where she was, which felt like an insult, which it was. The 5-man element hit the stairwell, up to the 3rd floor, found the roof hatch. One operator climbed the ladder, pushed the hatch open. It swung up and banged against the roof. He pulled himself up, weapon first, scanning through his PVS-31s. Strand was 30 feet away, prone, behind the parapet. She fired twice. Both rounds hit him in the face shield. Orange paint across his night vision. He was blind. He swore and dropped back down through the hatch. The man behind him on the ladder caught him. Chaos in the stairwell. Bodies stacked on a narrow ladder. Someone's elbow hit someone's night vision and knocked it sideways. Strand moved. She crossed the roof in 4 seconds. Pelletier saw her on thermal, a white shape sprinting across the flat concrete, and repositioned to the southwest corner. When the next operator came through the hatch, he scanned northeast, where the shots had come from. She was behind him, southwest. She fired 3 rounds. 2 hit him in the back. He was out. 6 operators marked total. 5 remaining. The team leader made a decision. He pulled his men off the ladder. He radioed the 3 perimeter operators, north fire escape. All 3. Roof access from exterior. Go. 3 operators moved to the north side fire escape. Metal stairs. Loud. Strand heard them from across the roof. She crossed back, another 4-second sprint, and reached the top of the fire escape as the first operator's head appeared above the roofline. She didn't shoot him. She waited. She let him get his upper body above the roofline, let his weight commit to the step, let his hands be occupied with the railing and his weapon and his balance. Then she fired. 1 round. Center mass. He stumbled back into the man behind him. The second operator tried to push past, raising his weapon. She fired twice more. 1 hit his weapon. 1 hit his arm. He dropped. The 3rd operator on the fire escape did something I respect. He stopped. He didn't push forward into the kill zone. He backed down 3 steps and keyed his radio. She's got the fire escape covered. We need another approach. There was no other approach. The roof had 2 access points, the interior hatch and the exterior fire escape. Strand controlled both. From a roof, she had elevation, she had cover behind the parapet, and she had the ability to reposition faster than they could climb. 36 minutes into the exercise, the team leader tried one more time. He sent 2 operators through the hatch simultaneously, one pushing through fast while the other provided suppressive fire from the ladder. Strand took a simonitian round in the left thigh. It stung. Pelletier told me he saw her flinch on thermal, but she didn't move from her position. She fired 4 rounds. 1 operator marked. The other dropped back down. 9 operators marked. 2 remaining. 39 minutes. At minute 41, the team leader called it. He keyed the exercise frequency and said, "Control, this is assault lead. We're calling index. We cannot take the roof. Index. End of exercise." 8 letters that meant 11 SEALs could not neutralize 1 intelligence specialist and 2 master-at-arms in a training building. Pelletier walked to the building. He found Strand on the roof, sitting on the parapet wall, her M4 across her knees, her sidearm still holstered. She'd never drawn it. She had 1 simonitian mark on her left thigh. 1. The M18 pistol she'd qualified with, the one that started all of this, was still in her holster with a full magazine. She was looking at the compound, not at the team, not at Pelletier, at the compound, the lights, the distant runway, the dark shape of the Gulf of Tajura beyond the fence line. Pelletier said her face was blank, not triumphant, Not relieved, blank, like she was already somewhere else. He said, "Hell of a thing, Strand." She said, "Can I get a ride back to the barracks? I have a shift at 0600. That's it. That's what she said. Below her, in the gravel yard south of the building, 9 operators were pulling off their gear and wiping orange paint off their face shields and their plate carriers and their arms and their legs. 2 were untouched, the team leader, who had stayed at the command position, and the third man on the fire escape, who had been smart enough to back off. Everyone else was marked. Orange paint in the darkness, glowing faintly under the compound lights. It looked like a crime scene. It looked like evidence. Nobody spoke to her. She came down the interior stairwell, walked past the cluster of operators, and got into the back of a Humvee that was waiting to take Opfer back to the barracks. Birch was already in the Humvee, covered in his own paint marks, grinning so hard his face hurt. Torres was there too, orange from his shoulders down, shaking her head. Birch said Strand sat in the back seat and closed her eyes and didn't say a word the entire ride. The debrief was the next morning. 0800. A room with a whiteboard and a projector and folding chairs and the particular smell of stale coffee and male frustration. Pelletier was there as the exercise observer. The team leader was there. His assistant team leader. The training officer who had organized the scenario. The intelligence officer, Strand's direct superior in the SIGINT chain. And the 11 operators, most of whom had showered the orange paint off their skin, but not off their gear, because Simonition paint doesn't come out of mall webbing without industrial solvent, and nobody had bothered to get any yet. Strand was not invited to the debrief. Let me say that again. Strand was not invited. The person who had just single-handedly denied a SEAL element their objective for 41 minutes, who had marked 9 of 11 operators, who had demonstrated a level of tactical thinking that most junior officers never achieve. She was not in the room. Birch wasn't invited either. Neither was Torres. Opfer doesn't attend the debrief. That's the standard procedure. Opfer is a prop. Opfer is the orange silhouette that falls down when you shoot it. Props don't get debriefed. Props get put back in the box. The debrief lasted 90 minutes. I know this because Pelletier was there, and Pelletier has a memory, like a court stenographer. He told me the team leader stood at the whiteboard for the first 20 minutes and drew diagrams of the building and the approach routes and the timeline. And everything he drew was accurate, and everything he said was professional, and at no point did he use the name Strand. He said Opfer, or the opposing force, or the defender on a roof. Never her name, never her rate, never her gender. It was as if the exercise had been conducted against a weather event, a storm they hadn't predicted, an act of God that had nothing to do with a 23-year-old intelligence specialist who had read the exercise rules more carefully than they had. Pelletier told me the operators were quiet. Not the good kind of quiet, not the reflective, professional quiet of men analyzing their mistakes. The other kind, the kind that sounds like a room full of pressure with no release valve. A few of them asked tactical questions. Why didn't we check the roof first? Why did we commit to the hatch when she'd already demonstrated she could cover it? Why didn't we use a distraction, a flashbang through the hatch while a team came up the fire escape simultaneously? These were good questions. They were the right questions, but they were asked in a tone that suggested the answers were someone else's fault. The team leader's after-action report was filed that afternoon. I've seen it. It's 3 pages long. The sentence I read to you at the beginning, Intelligence Specialist Strand exploited positional advantage and simonition allocation to neutralize 9 of 11 operators during the force-on-force exercise conducted on November 14, 2017. That sentence appears on page 2, paragraph 4, between a description of the building layout and a recommendation for additional CQB training hours. It is surrounded by passive voice and technical language and the kind of careful, bureaucratic prose that the military uses when it wants to say something happened without saying what it means. Nowhere in the report does it say that Strand planned the defense. Nowhere does it say she read the exercise rules. Nowhere does it say she checked the lunar calendar. Nowhere does it say she spent 8 hours walking the building, counting steps, identifying dead doors, moving shelving units, unlocking hatches. Nowhere does it say she assigned positions to Birch and Torres that maximize their effectiveness and minimize their exposure. Nowhere does it say she briefed them for 40 minutes using a diagram drawn on MRE cardboard. Nowhere does it say she lay prone on a concrete roof for 29 minutes without moving, counting the intervals of the perimeter guard's head turns, waiting for someone to come to her, because she understood, in the way that the best tactical minds understand, that patience is a weapon and silence is a position and waiting is not the same as doing nothing. The report says exploited positional advantage. That's what it says. After the debrief, something changed. Not dramatically, not overnight. It changed the way weather changes in the desert, slowly, then all at once when you're not looking. The nickname stopped. Logistics and logistics bitch disappeared from the team's vocabulary as if they had never existed. Nobody announced this. Nobody held a meeting. Nobody apologized. The words simply ceased. In their place was something else. Not respect, not exactly. Respect would have meant acknowledging what happened, and they were not going to do that. What replaced the nickname was distance. A careful, maintained distance. The kind of space you give to something you don't understand and don't want to engage with. They stopped talking to her in the chow hall because they had never really been talking to her. They'd been talking at her, performing for each other, and now the performance had become too expensive. So they stopped. She continued working. 14-hour days in the SCF. Headphones. And Ms. intercepted communications from villages she would never visit, spoken by people she would never meet, about plans she would help to interrupt. She wrote 11 more intelligence reports between November 2017 and February 2018. 3 were flagged critical. 1 contributed to a mission that I can't describe because the classification level is above anything I'm allowed to discuss. But I was told by someone who would know that the mission was successful and that her analysis was central to it. She was awarded a Navy and Marine Corps Achievement Medal. The citation mentions superior analytical performance and direct support to Special Operations Forces. It does not mention the force-on-force exercise. It does not mention the roof. It does not mention 9 of 11. In March 2018, her rotation ended. She flew out of Djibouti on AC-17 to Ramstein, then commercial to Norfolk. She checked into a transient personnel unit at Little Creek. She was offered orders to NSA, the desk job she'd avoided 2 years earlier. This time she took them. She spent the last year of her enlistment at Fort Meade, in a building with air conditioning that worked and coffee that was fresh and windows that looked out on a parking lot full of cars belonging to people who would never know her name. She separated from the Navy in June 2019. Honorable discharge. 5 years for months of service. She was 25 years old. I want to tell you about the silence now, because the silence is the story. The silence is why I'm telling you this at all. When I started looking for Kira Strand, I didn't have much. I had the after-action report, 1 sentence on page 2. I had Pelletier's name from a friend of a friend. I had the general knowledge that something had happened at Lemonnier in 2017 involving a female intelligence specialist and a SEAL team in a training exercise that didn't go the way anyone expected. That's what I started with. That and a phone. Pelletier talked to me. Birch talked to me. The recruiter, Dominguez, talked to me. A retired chief who knew Strand's uncle talked to me. Strand's mother did not talk to me. Strand's father did not talk to me. Not at first. I found her address through public records. She lives in a small town in Virginia. Not the part of Virginia with the government contractors and the clear facilities and the Starbucks on every corner. The other Virginia, the rural part, the part with fields and churches and post offices that close at noon. She has a house, small, one story, a garden in the back that a neighbor told me she tends every morning. She works at a veterinary clinic. She is not married. She has a dog, a black lab mix she adopted from a shelter in 2020. Her neighbor, an older woman named Mrs. Calloway, told me that Strand is polite and private and brings her tomatoes from the garden in August, and that she has never once mentioned the Navy. I wrote her a letter. I don't usually write letters. I make phone calls. I show up. I sit across from someone and I ask my questions, and I don't leave until I have what I came for or until they tell me to leave, and sometimes I don't leave even then. But something about Strand made me write a letter. Maybe it was everything I'd already learned about her. Maybe it was the way every single person who described her used the word quiet, not shy, not withdrawn, not antisocial, but quiet in a way that a rifle is quiet between shots. I wrote the letter. I explained who I was. I explained what I was doing. I explained that I had spoken to Pelletier and Birch and that I knew about the exercise and that I wanted to tell her story. I said I would tell it whether she participated or not, because the story deserves to be told, but that it would be better with her voice in it. She didn't respond. I waited 3 weeks. I wrote a second letter. Shorter. I said I respected her privacy, but that I was going to keep trying because that's what I do. She didn't respond. I called her father, Commander David Strand, USN retired. He picked up on the second ring. He has a voice like a man who has spent 30 years giving orders on bridge wings in open ocean. Clear, unhurried, practiced. I told him who I was. I told him about the project. I told him I was trying to reach his daughter. There was a long pause. The kind of pause that a former commanding officer gives you when he's deciding whether to dismiss you or hear you out. Then he said, "Mr. Holloway, my daughter doesn't talk about Djibouti." I said, "I understand that, sir. But what happened there?" He cut me off. Not rudely. Precisely. The way a scalpel cuts. He said, "She doesn't talk about Djibouti. She doesn't talk about the Navy. She doesn't talk about much." Another pause. Then, "She's my daughter, and I love her, but she came back from that place with less words than she left with. And I've learned not to ask for the one she lost. She came back with less words than she left with." I wrote that down. I've been carrying it since. I made one more attempt. I drove to Virginia, to her town. I didn't go to her house. I'm not that kind of man, and she's not the kind of woman you surprise. I went to the veterinary clinic where she works. It's a small place on a county road with a gravel parking lot and a sign with a cartoon dog on it and a bell on the door that rings when you walk in. I walked in. The bell rang, and she was standing behind the counter. She's shorter than I expected. 5'5", maybe 5'6". Brown hair cut to her shoulders. No muck-up, no humidity. She was wearing green scrubs and holding a clipboard and looking at me with eyes that I recognized. I recognized them because I've seen them before in other faces in other stories. Eyes that have seen too much and decided to stop showing it. I was like a vault door, heavy, closed, and locked from the inside. She said, "Can I help you?" I said, "My name is Hatch Holloway. I think you know why I'm here." She looked at me for a long time. 5 seconds. 10. 15. In a normal conversation, 15 seconds of eye contact without words is unbearable. But she held it, and I held it, and neither of us blinked. Then she said, "I don't have anything to say." I said, "You don't have to say anything. I just wanted you to know that I know, and that it matters." She put the clipboard down. She looked at the counter. She looked at the bell on the door. She looked back at me, and she said, "Thank you for coming." Then she picked up the clipboard and walked into the back room, and I heard a door close, and I stood in that veterinary clinic with the cartoon dog on the sign, and the bell still vibrating from when I walked in, and I understood that this was all I was going to get. Thank you for coming. 3 words from a woman who once held a rooftop against 11 of the most highly trained combat operators in the world. 3 words from a woman who lay on concrete for 29 minutes without moving, counting seconds between a guard's head turns. 3 words from a woman who told a SEAL in a gym, "I heard you the first time," and meant it in every direction that sentence can travel. 3 words. And those 3 words are the only ones she gave me. I think about her sometimes. When I'm in my office at night, going through files, listening to recordings, trying to find the shape of someone who doesn't want to be found. I think about the roof, not the tactical part, not the positioning, the patience, the shot placement. I think about the moment after. The moment Pelletier found her sitting on the parapet, looking at the compound, and she asked for a ride to the barracks because she had a shift at 0600. That moment. The moment where triumph should live, but doesn't. The moment where the story is supposed to peak and instead goes flat and quiet, like a heart monitor when the heart decides it's done. She had a shift at 0600. 9 operators covered in paint, 5 months of being called a name that wasn't hers, a cache of RPGs she found from a hot metal box, a building she walked 40 times, a lunar calendar she checked, a briefing on MRE cardboard, a 41-minute masterclass in tactical patience. And what she wanted was a ride to the barracks. Because she had a shift. My spotter in Panama was a master sergeant named Reyes. Friedman, the kind of quiet that other quiet people notice. We spent 11 days in a position in the jungle outside a compound, waiting for a target that never came. 11 days. On day 9, I asked him how he stayed sane during long operations. He thought about it for a while. Then he said, "I decided a long time ago that what I do doesn't have to mean something to anyone except me. If it means something to me, that's enough. And if it stops meaning something to me, I'll stop doing it." I think Strand figured that out too. I think she figured it out on that roof, or maybe before the roof, or maybe she was born knowing it. That what she could do didn't need an audience. That the exercise didn't need to be talked about. That the after-action report didn't need her name. That 9 of 11 didn't need to become a legend or a lesson or a story told by a man she'd never met on a channel she'd never watch. It just needed to have happened. And it did. And she knows it did. And that's enough. I keep the after-action report in my desk. Page 2. Paragraph 4. That sentence. I read it sometimes when I need to remember something important about the difference between what gets written down and what actually happened. Between the record and the truth. Between exploited positional advantage and a woman on a roof in the dark, counting seconds, breathing slowly, waiting for the world to come to her. Petty Officer 2nd Class, Kira Strand. United States Navy. Intelligence Specialist. Out of Annapolis, Maryland. Not the academy. The town. She doesn't talk about Djibouti. She doesn't talk about much. But now you know, and now you carry it. That's how it stays alive.